if you put your defenses down and listen to what people are saying and try to find common ground and try to find win-wins, they're certainly all out there. And I think that we don't do enough of that. Certainly.
Welcome. Today, we're recording a new episode of the Leaders in Tech podcast, which is turning out to be one of the best leadership podcasts in technology on the internet. Today, we have with us Larry Grossman, an amazing example of the leadership that we need to build this world with technology and make it better. Larry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Great to be here.
Larry, for the audience, can you tell me, again, your full name, where do you live, and what do you do for a living?
Sure. My name is Larry Grossman. I live in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and I am the Vice President for Cybersecurity at Tetra Tech. Tetra Tech is an environmental and technology company. And so recently joined Tetra Tech after a 30-year career at the Federal Aviation Administration. I was a career government employee and retired as the Chief Information Security Officer. So I was into cybersecurity, technology, information technology, operational technology. All of those were kind of my focus at the agency when I was there. And so now in the private sector side, I joined Tetra Tech because of the great technology that they bring to the U.S. government and around the world. I found them to be a very exciting company to be part of. So I find myself working hard here.
What is what they do? How do they add value for the U.S. government, for example?
So Tetra Tech is a services company. We provide services to many federal agencies. It's a pretty large company with many divisions doing a lot of different things. We, as an example, do a lot of work in clean water and wastewater recovery. We do a lot of work with disaster recovery. Whenever there's a hurricane or a flood or wildfire, Tetra Tech is involved in assisting with cleanup. We do a lot of work with USAID and other countries. We're working closely with the Ukraine government on power restoration, just a kind of a myriad of things. My focus has been working with the federal government and within the information, the FIT division, the Federal Information Technology Division, which really is focused on providing IT and cybersecurity services to many government agencies, including the military.
That is fantastic. Now, after 30 years of a successful career in the federal government, why would you decide to keep going and not retire?
I had no plans to go back to work when I retired. But it's funny how things happen. A colleague of mine had retired a few years back, and she was working for Tetra Tech, and we happened to be talking. I told her, that I was retiring, and she said, "Oh, you have to come to work for Tetra Tech. Do you want to work at all?" I'm like, "Well, I wouldn't mind doing something." And so she's like, "I'm going to call you right back." She hangs up the phone. She calls me back 5 minutes later. She says, "I want you to talk to this guy, Olivier Genal. He's the president of the Federal Information Technology Division of Tetra Tech. He wants to talk to you." So I said, "Okay." We had a conversation, and we really hit it off. And I think he's a fantastic leader. He very business focused, as private sector side is, and that takes a little bit of adjusting. When you're government, your concerns really aren't the bottom line from a financial perspective. Your focus is the mission of whatever agency you're supporting. And we used to. When I was working as the leader for cybersecurity in FAA, we really would be competing against private sector for cyber professionals, other government agencies for cyber professionals, and I used to say, you come to work for the FAA, it's the greatest mission in government, and it really is, and I feel that, and that's if if I miss anything about my tenure at FAA, it's certainly the people and that mission of, of moving people securely. On a personal note, I'm a pilot myself. I'm a flight instructor. I teach people to fly, and I really love that part, and that really keeps me in the airplane. And I have my own airplane that I travel locally in, and just really enjoy it tremendously. So it's just that's kind of what I miss. But I felt the need to keep my brain really working in technology. I love technology, and I love leading programs and and helping organizations. So I figured I'd try this for a little bit and see how things work out.
That's beautiful. I share kind of like the same mentality as you. I was blessed enough to be able to retire in 2014 when my basic passive income matched my expenses. I'm like, okay, I can watch Netflix for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But instead of doing that, I actually decided to take more risk. And now I run multiple technology companies and real estate business. And it's just because there is no more risk, right? The worst that could happen is I go back to 2014 and I still have that passive income. Because I think life, you need to have a purpose in life, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
I mean, there is nothing wrong with retiring, but if you still have the capacity and the market still needs you, why wouldn't you? I mean, it's not for the money anymore, right? But you need to be able to provide, to add value to society, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree completely, David. And I feel like, watching Netflix sounds interesting for about 2 days. And on the third day, you're looking at yourself saying, what am I doing? Sitting here watching Netflix all day. You can't do it. So the interacting with people, the finding hard problems to solve, I think that's what keeps the juices flowing for sure.
That's beautiful. Now let's look back in time to become a great leader, especially with such a high mission. I know the FAA is very strict on the people they allow in, let alone leading the cybersecurity team. You need a lot of self-discipline and self-leadership in order to have a position like that. So let's go back in time. Where were you at when you were in your last year in high school? What was in your mind? What did you decide to do with your life?
I was when I was in high school, I was a musician. I played the trumpet, and I was planning to be a professional musician. That was my goal. And then, I realized as I was graduating from high school or getting ready to graduate that, I was never going to make it as a professional musician. As much as I loved it, it didn't love me enough to allow me to make a living. So I also liked flying, and I decided to go to school for aviation. I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University down in Daytona Beach, and I can tell this story now because I was at Embry-Riddle a year and a half ago at the president of the university had a technology symposium, and I did a keynote there and sat at his table. And I told him, I said, I was a student here at Embry-Riddle back in the early 80s. And he said, oh, yeah? I said, yeah, but I didn't graduate. My roommate and I, we both had our pilot's license, and my roommate and I decided that we would rent an airplane, an Embry-Riddle airplane, and we would fly it to the Bahamas for the weekend. And which we did. And when we got back, what happened was, to make a long story short, Embry-Riddle has a lot of aircraft, and the aircraft have a number on them, a registration number, and all of the registration numbers of Embry-Riddle airplane end in ER, or Echo Romeo. So whenever you're flying around in South Florida or Central Florida, and you're talking to an air traffic controller, you give your number, 117 Echo Romeo, the controller knows right away that it's an Embry-Riddle airplane. And so the only thing that we didn't realize when we flew out to the Bahamas, and we had a great time, was that the FAA had called Embry-Riddle and said, be advised, this aircraft just departed U.S. airspace. And so when we got back, we had the dean waiting for us. We had our parents had been called. It was like a whole big thing. So my career in Embry-Riddle ended. But it's funny because I hadn't been back on campus until I was there giving the keynote. And so I told the story at our dinner, and he got a big kick out of it. And it's funny now. It certainly wasn't funny at the time. And my parents certainly didn't think it was funny either. But it was one of those things in life that you just grow up. But I kept that love of aviation, and even though I finished my degree at Stockton University here in South Jersey in computer science, and I continued to fly, and I got there were no flying jobs. I decided I was going to be a professional pilot. I was just going to be a airline pilot. And there were just no airline pilot jobs at that time. There's peaks and valleys for when you need pilots. And so it happened to be in a pretty deep valley at the time. And so I ended up getting a job while I was in college at the FAA Technical Center that's right here in Atlantic City. And it's a huge facility, 5,000 acres. They do all R&D for the Federal Aviation Administration. They do the second level support for all the air traffic control systems. So it's a really big facility. And I got a job there and started making decent money. And then all of a sudden I get a call, hey, we have this pilot job for you. Well, at the time I was probably making like I don't know, $50,000 a year, $40,000 a year. And the starting salary was $18,000. And
less than half.
Less than half. And so I was like, is this really what I want to do? Like, can I afford to take that kind of a pay cut? I love flying, but I think the timing for me just didn't work out. So, things happen the way they happen. And then I was working for a small company at the FAA that was contracting to the FAA. Then I moved from them to a company, Martin Marietta, that later became Lockheed Martin. Worked for them for a few years, and then I moved over to the government side and began my career as a federal employee, and really never looked back. So it's been a lot of fun, and I still fly today. So it all worked out for me.
That's beautiful. It's funny that you got your job during college at the FAA, and you ended up being at the FAA later on.
Yeah. Ironic, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, being an airplane pilot is fascinating. I all my life, that's all I wanted to do. It's funny that we have that in common. When I was 12 years old, my older sister's boyfriend was an airplane pilot. So while they were dating, he will take me out on the weekends on his airplane, and I'm come from the Central America, from Guatemala, and it has, if people don't know where it is, it's besides Mexico, but it's a country that looks like an island. It's got 32 volcanoes on it, more trees than you can ever count, rivers and valleys and lakes. So he will take me out of the, one of the airports in the city, and we will just fly up above one of the rivers that goes down into the ocean. So we will just go from like a big city, and then we start just going down after we, cleared up, and he will go as close as possible to the trees that were on the side of the river. And then you will eventually see how the river just turned into this big, beautiful ocean. And then we'll just make loops around, on top of the beaches and all that. And it was fascinating for me. Like, I just fell in love with flying. I could see what an eagle sees,
Yeah.
And that sense of freedom. So obviously I was a kid and I was very impressed. I mean, we were doing this every other weekend. It was many times. So I told my dad, hey, I want to become an airplane pilot. And he says, well, who's going to pay for the classes? It's very expensive.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I don't have the money. He said, so the only option is for you to go to the military. So I signed up to become an Army official, and I did 2 years military school. Problem is, back then in the 80s, there was a big civil war going on in the country. So my father actually later on told me that he actually supported my decision because he wanted me to have military training because my older brother died in the war. So he said, it's better that you're prepared and you're ready, you know how to fight and, you know, just be a victim on the street. So I thought he was letting me in to become an airplane pilot. So here I am, ready to become an official, you know, in the official school. So, you know, I was going to be, you know, a lieutenant afterwards, a 5-year career. And then 2 years into it, they announced that they closed the airplane academy. So the flight academy was closed down. And, you know, I've researched, and it was because most of the planes were shut down, and they had the little planes that they had, there were too many pilots for the planes that they had. So I'm like, okay, I'm not here. So the only choice was for me to do infantry or at sea, or, you know, go to the mountains and fight in the mountains. I'm like, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to learn how to ride a plane, you know. So I quit, but the passion for flying was always with me. And it's funny, I never ever became a pilot. I had the pleasure to have taken a plane a couple of times, but it's always been beautiful. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, they came out with these little planes called Icon A5. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
And the dream was that, right? Get an Icon A plane, get at least the sports pilot license, and grab that plane from Miami and fly it into the Bahamas, because it actually goes to the Bahamas. It's, you know, the range is long enough. But it was just a dream, you know. After you look at the logistics, and I live in Canada, just getting to Florida was a 3-hour, you know, commercial flight. So I never pursued it afterwards.
Yeah. They're neat little airplanes, those Icons. I've seen a lot of them, and they land on water, and I had the opportunity with the FAA. We did a lot of work up in Alaska. So one of the last trips I went up, I decided to stay an extra few days, and I got my float plane rating, or my seaplane rating, up in Alaska, and that was the most fun thing that we did. Flew around up by you know, outside of Anchorage, and land in these little tiny lakes, and you know, and it's really an experience. I'll tell you.
It's beautiful. Talking about seaplanes, we were writing a project. We were writing a big piece of software for an educational company. So it was simulations for education. And one of the investors had a seaplane. So we did a team building exercise once. It was about 10 years ago. And he said, oh, let's go on my plane. So he had a big, like, 10-seater. He upgraded everything with, you know, all the latest, you know, equipment. It looked awesome. So he took us from where we are, and we flew all the way up to the Muskokas, like, you know, an hour flight. And he landed right on the lake, this crystal clear lake. It was summertime. And this is what impressed me the most. You know, he you know, so he got on the water, and he went all the way up to his hangar in his cottage, and he had a garage door opener. The thing opened, and he actually went with the plane right into the garage. I'm like, oh, this is so cool.
That's great. That's amazing. What a great story. That's a big airplane too, huh? Put 10 people in.
Yeah. He was a very well-off gentleman, for sure. Now, tell me, why computer science? I don't know many pilots that are computer scientists, you know?
You know, I think it was the beginning of computer science then. I think it was you know, it was just starting out, and I was fascinated by the technology. I mean, back then, we were learning to program with card readers and tape. And so then when I started taking some classes, and ended up, after just my 3rd or 4th class, maybe it was my 2nd semester or 3rd semester, I ended up getting the job at the FAA Tech Center, working for, you know, this little company. And we were actually working with what's called paper tape. I don't know if you've ever even heard of paper tape, but no. It's literally a spool of tape, and they used to punch little holes in the tape based on to read the code, and feed this paper tape into a reader, and it would read the code. And yeah, it was way back in the early days. Yeah.
But actually, I think I actually saw it because I think that replaced punch cards. Remember?
Yeah, replaced punch cards.
Because it was much faster, because now you were rolling, like the punches had to be sorted. Oh, wow. Yeah. I didn't learn how to program. What I started was assembly. It still was pretty rudimentary, but I started with assembly language, and then I went into C, and eventually became C++. But my uncle, he started with punch cards. It's crazy, but people think that technology was here just like this, and the evolution was slow at the beginning, right?
Yeah. I mean, and the computers had, no processing power. So your code, you would write it in assembly or one of the different assembly languages. We worked with a lot of different assembly languages based on the hardware manufacturer all had their own slightly unique assembly languages. And it was, you had to write your code very efficiently because the computer had, half a megabyte of memory, and that's it, and people see that today. They're like, what? How did that even work? But yeah, I mean, the computers worked on literally no power. I mean, when you consider, the Air Force, they had the SR-71. That airplane was developed without computers, with slide rules, and so it's still one of the most advanced aircraft in the world when you think about what it accomplished.
Incredible, and computers too. It's amazing. The first computer that I ever touched in my life was an Apple IIc, and that computer was text-based. People don't even know that Apple had computers that were text-based, no mouse, no nothing, right? And my father, he bought the computer for the house, and he was so proud because he said, "This is the computer that was on one of the space shuttles." Imagine that. Back in the 70s,
Yeah. I mean, if you ever watch the movie about Apollo 13, the Tom Hanks movie, and the computing power that they had in that rocket was like zero by today's standards, and they figured out how to get stuff done. So that it always intrigued me, and that's really why I ended up going into computer science. And with the tie to aviation, it was the perfect fit for me.
That's fantastic. Now, another thing that I must point for the audience is that despite that you have a passion that doesn't become a way to make money, you can still keep your passion, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I teach flying, and you certainly don't teach flying for the money. For all the hours you put in, I do it for the love and the passion that I have, and I love teaching people. Even though they can put you into some interesting positions from time to time when you're teaching people how to land airplanes, and it's a little windy, and there's a fine line you walk between taking the airplane away from them every time they try and land and fixing the landing, and letting them not break the airplane because they landed too hard, or they landed sideways, or they, started to porpoise the plane, or, any one of a number of things. So, there's a balance. And the trick that I've learned is you help them without thinking that they're being helped. And so that's always, it's worked well for me. But yeah, I mean, it certainly, teaching people to fly certainly kept my passion alive, and it made me a better pilot.
Yeah, and also help you to be a good leader too. Like those lessons that you just told me, they apply directly to being a leader in technology, right? You are helping the person without thinking that you're helping them, right? So you avoid major catastrophes. You have a box, if you will, where they learn, and they advance, but they're still not wrecking the business, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've always, when I've led people, I've always tried to build a culture that people shouldn't be afraid to make a mistake, especially in technology, especially with respect to cybersecurity and cyber professionals. You want to promote the collaboration. You want to promote the intellectual curiosity in people's minds that make them, looking for kind of needles in haystacks is what really a lot of the folks do that are on the defensive side of, operational cybersecurity. Looking for patterns, looking for, we have a lot of automation now that helps with that, pattern recognition, but still, you have to have people that are gonna make decisions at the lowest level. And, my kind of theory on this is I'll always support a wrong decision to people. I won't beat people up for it if they can explain to me what the methodology they used to make that decision.
Yeah.
And that it was a thought through, they thought it through, and that, whatever they saw, whatever indications they saw led them from one step to another. And here's how they got to the decision they made. And if they can explain that to me, articulate it, okay, I'll support them. We make mistakes every day. Everybody makes mistakes. And if you have a workforce that's afraid to make a mistake, you can have a workforce that doesn't do anything. They're gonna just sit there and watch the world go by.
Yeah, fear paralyzes. I mean, there is no better way to do nothing in life than to being afraid. I mean, there is two types of fears, I believe. The fear that is healthy, that tells you there is a hole there, so you better stop walking, for example. And the fear that says it's so tormenting that paralyzes you, right?
Yeah.
For example, fear of making mistakes. The only way to learn is through mistakes. Obviously, you have mentors like yourself where you can teach them this is the path, but eventually they need to take off the training wheels, if you will, and start making their own decisions and start progressing in life.
Yeah.
I always talk about this analogy. When my father taught me how to ride bicycle, he told me all the theory and it was fine. And I knew the theory, but it wasn't until I actually went onto that bicycle without the training wheels and I bruised my knees a couple of times that I learned how to balance that bike. Now, I could have stopped in the second time that I bruised my knees and a little bit of blood came out and I would have never learned. But my dad kept telling me, keep going, you're going to get it. But he made sure I didn't break my leg, if that makes sense.
Right. No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's the same. I mean, we live in in an era now with the threat landscape is changing so quickly that your workforce that you have of cyber professionals needs to be able to do exactly that. They need to be able to maybe skin their knees once or twice, but learn from that. And they need to be able to start making decisions because there's not enough cyber professionals. There aren't to protect the critical infrastructure that I was kind of tasked with managing. And so your workforce has to be empowered to help and finding those people who want to learn and want to improve and want to move into leadership positions and want to do the best thing and want to kind of scratch that itch of why is this happening? Why is that? Let me figure this out. Let me follow this. Let me pull this thread and then pull that thread. And eventually I'll figure it out. That's what we have to be promoting as leaders.
It's beautiful. How did you get into cybersecurity? There is many areas of IT that you can fall into, right?
So I was working for the FAA. I was managing an air traffic control system, one of FAA's air traffic control systems. And 9/11 happened. And shortly after 9/11, we had stood up, shortly before 9/11, we had stood up in FAA a network that was using TCP/IP. That was an IP-based, internet protocol-based network. Separate network than what your mail and all that stuff is. And it still exists today, but it wasn't nearly as secure as it is today. My boss at the time, he got moved into a program at FAA called the NAS Defense Program. And he called me and said, listen, I need you to come over on a detail. We have this network we don't know what the protections are in this network. I need you to see what systems are using this network. FAA is a massive organization, and there's people all over the country, really all over the world. We need to see who's on it. We need to move people off of it who don't need to be on it. We need to put intrusion detection sensors on it. We need all this kind of cybersecurity stuff. But in 2001, we really weren't calling it. It really wasn't as big as it is today. We were starting to. And so that's what I did. I moved over and I started working in that area. I didn't stay in cybersecurity, though. I moved back into IT for a little bit after a few years and ran some programs around application development, enterprise architecture, building, IT inventories when inventories didn't exist. We had FAA was an organization with 60,000 employees and, countless, servers, workstations, network devices, network attached printers. And we didn't really have an inventory of all that stuff and what software was running on it all. And it was a wild, wild west. And so how do we start to get our hands around that? So I built a process to start doing that. This was before a lot of the software products now that build that for you. We didn't really have that. And we were living in a very kind of federated environment. Every organization within the FAA was managing their own devices separate from everyone else. And so, those days are long gone now. We have centralized management, centralized inventory and software management. A lot of those best practices are now implemented, but they weren't back then in the early 2000s. They were still pretty much, if you wanted a piece of software, you went out and bought it, put it on your machine and your employees' machines, and that was it, and just used it. And so, but that was just the way things were done. And so wrapping that all, but the FAA administrator wanted to know, hey, how many workstations and servers and network, how many things do we have attached to, and all these, hundreds of facilities we have all over the place. And everyone kind of shrugged their shoulders. We have no idea. And how much am I spending for all this? Well, we have no idea. So it's like, Larry, go figure this out. So, yeah.
It's incredible. The same thing happened to me. One of my leadership positions was for a very large insurance company. Just so you have an idea, just developers, they had over 1,000 developers for this large multinational. And it was early 2000s. And I wasn't hired to do that, but I was tasked with that job when they realized the mess that they had. And in that time was liability, because they were partners with Microsoft. So they were buying all the licenses from Microsoft back in the CD eras, right? And they didn't know how much they were paying Microsoft and whether it was enough, because people just grabbed the CDs and installed them everywhere with the enterprise licensing. Microsoft allowed you to install everywhere. And we had thousands and thousands of computers. So it's like, I was thinking, wouldn't it be sound that a company that is selling you the software to have the system to manage their licenses? Why do we have to do it? but it didn't exist. So I had a large team under me doing this. We actually wrote custom software I invented a little piece of software, like almost like a Trojan horse, if you will, that will send down to the network. It will turn on, get installed, and make a full inventory of going through the registry, and just look at all the software installed, all the licensing from the registry, and filled up this huge database in the backend. And then we started running reports against the purchasing department. And little did we know, there was a lot of software being used that wasn't accounted for. Or people will just bring software from their house and install it in the local PC. Now imagine the cybersecurity risk about that, right?
It was crazy. I remember when I first saw the inventories that we were building when we did this. We saw Microsoft Word like 25 or 30 different times, but it was called out in different ways so that it didn't look like the same piece of software. So all of the software, it depends on how it went into the registry, it would go in all differently. You couldn't build those really succinct inventories. And Microsoft was hitting us up for what they called the true up, right? You have to do that, right? Microsoft Microsoft knew how many copies you were using, and they would come to the agency and say, okay, you know, for your enterprise license, your true up bill is $4 million. And we had no way to say, wait a minute, that's not right. We couldn't, because we didn't have an inventory ourselves. So building that inventory was critical in that. I always ask the Microsoft guys, you know, guys always true up. Do you ever true down and write us a check? They're like, oh no, we don't do that.
Exactly. And they knew what they were doing, right? They will give you a system management service that said, this is the license that you buy, this is the license you get, and that's it. And if you need more, come from us. But it was kind of deceiving, right? Because they will allow you to install it everywhere, and then you had to pay up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it was really the efforts that we had to build those inventories were done to try and save money, right? To try to understand. It really wasn't done with cybersecurity, foundation, but now everything is. I mean, cybersecurity has exploded. I know when I was at the FAA, I mean, the cybersecurity role was typically just basically an internal job where you were just looking at what systems were running at FAA and what controls needed to be added to those systems and included in those systems, and so that was a job in and of itself. But then we started working externally with other countries and with the OEM, the manufacturers, and we were working with all of the software companies that are across the aviation ecosystem, and working with airports and working with airlines and so the job was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it really is you have to look at, when you're thinking about aviation and cybersecurity, you have to look at the whole ecosystem, because if you have an airport that has a fuel farm that is operated by operational technology, and that fuel farm is compromised and at best just shut down, an aircraft can't fuel because of a cyber incident. If that airport happens to be a Chicago O'Hare or JFK or Dallas Fort Worth or one of those big airports, that the FAA's mission is safety, but it's also efficiency. So it's a safety and efficiency. If you talk about the FAA, we're in the safety business, but we're also in the efficiently operating aircraft, and it kills efficiency, and so it would affect the flow of aircraft across the country if you have a compromise. So when you start thinking about it in terms of that, or a third-party company that computes weight and balance for a number of airlines, and if they're compromised, and then if you have airlines like American or Delta, American, all of United, and all of these airlines, if they can't get their weight and balance calculations done, they can't push from the gate, they can't move, new airplanes can't land, then you start to have all of these problems. So if you look at things very myopically, from the FAA systems and services are all secure, you really don't see the whole picture. You've got to look across the whole ecosystem, because everything's interconnected now.
It's incredible. Well, what a job! I wouldn't want to be in your position, holding that responsibility.
I'm not in that position anymore. But no, it was a great job. It was a lot of fun. I loved it. I loved working for the agency. Certainly, it was it had its share of challenges, but all in all, it was a terrific experience.
That is fantastic, Larry. Thank you so much, and thanks for the value that you're adding to society. Like every time now that I go on a play, I remember that you used to manage that. It's incredible, and it's amazing how it's aligned to your passion for flying, right? So many times I hear people that says, I have a passion for this, and then they go to their passion, and their passion becomes a job, and that actually kills it.
Yeah. 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 That's a shame when that happens. But
right?
Yeah. So, well, if you're ever in Atlantic City, let me know. We'll go flying.
That'll be awesome. Yeah, I'll take you up for that. Larry, time went by so fast. I would like to ask you one last question before we finish the podcast. I would love to respect your time and thank you for being in the show. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
Collaborate.
Collaborate. Beautiful. Simple.
It's the most important thing. If you can put your defenses down and listen to what people are saying and try to find common ground and try to find win-wins. They're certainly all out there, and I think that we don't do enough of that. Certainly, if you look at what's going on in Washington D.C. with the partisan, actions and even a lot of times in your own little environments, we see neighbors. I'm not gonna move my trash cans over because that's my space, or why is that? And if people would just try to look at things through someone else's eyes and try to understand what people are going through and build collaboration, I think we'd be in a much better place.
Yeah, and as a leader, I had to let people go. Brilliant people, some of the best developers that I've met. I had to let them go because they didn't want to collaborate.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't have it, because it doesn't matter how brilliant you are if you can never compete with a group of people that are collaborating and producing value than one single person that is that is exceptional. It's hard. When people are not willing to share and collaborate, you don't have any progress in your society anymore, right?
Great. That's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Larry, thank you so much for being in the show. If people would like to ask you more questions, are you on LinkedIn or somewhere online?
I am on LinkedIn. Yes, absolutely. Feel free. And David, it's been a true honor, my honor to talk with you today.
Hey, thank you so much, Larry. The honor is mine. Have a beautiful rest of the day, and I'll see you around.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.